So today we're going to talk about how to build a risk management file. So most people don't even know what a risk management file is, but this is specific to the medical device industry, and the standard it applies is 14971. Why we're covering this particular topic is when you look at the quality system requirements for medical devices through the FDA, if you look prior to February 2026, it's the QSR, and risk only shows up once, and it only shows up as we have to have a risk, we have to address risks in design and development, but it doesn't cover risk anywhere else. There isn't a whole bunch of examples of here's where we have to cover risk. When we switch over to the QMSR on February 2nd of 2026, everything changes because now we're incorporating by reference ISO 1345 2016, which includes risks in many places, and it clearly states in clause 7.1 that you should refer to ISO 14971 for risk management. And the FDA is gearing up for this and doing a lot more training of their team, their inspection team at ORA, on what to look for in a risk management file. And ODE already knows what's supposed to be in a risk management file. The Office of Device Evaluation, where you submit your 510K, they already recognize 14971. So it's not like this is a new standard. This has been around since 2019. So it's already 6 years old. And people know this standard. They expect it for CE marking. They expect it for other markets. And most important of all, you have to have a risk management file for software now, not just one little hazard analysis, but you need the whole risk management file. You also need a risk management file for electrical safety testing. Back in the olden days, we didn't have to do that, but now we have a whole risk management file that gets submitted with your electrical safety submission. So no matter what, if you make a medical device, you're going to have a risk management file. So you need to know what goes in a risk management file. It's not a single document. It's not a single little tiny thing. It is a chronological package that has all the activities that you conducted. It begins in the very beginning. It begins with a plan. It ends with a report, but that's not it. It's a living file, so you have to update it. Just like your device master record, you're expected to update it. Keep it current. So every time you hear about a new complaint, you got to go back to your risk management file and make sure that that new complaint is in there somewhere as a risk that's identified, or update your risk management file to include that new risk. You also, if you make any changes to your design, any changes to your labeling, more updates to your risk management file. So you're constantly making updates to your risk management file through post-market surveillance. Another thing that's going to be added February 2nd, 2026, they're going to add clause 8.2.1 feedback, which is the post-market surveillance requirement. So you have to have a risk management file. You have to take it from plan all the way to report, and you have to update it frequently. So if you don't make an update, you at least need to say why you didn't make an update. So that's still an update. So we're going to cover what's covered in a risk management file, but the most important thing to do is read the fine print. So there is a clause in 14971 2019, and I'm going to share on my screen here the standard. So I actually have it pulled up, and I'm going to close this little thing so you have a little bit more screen to work with. But the section 4.5 is where we have the standard. So let me see if I can get there. So in clause 4.5, it says this is the risk management file. But if you read carefully, it says, in addition to the requirements of all the other clauses of this document, in addition to everything else in this document that's 49 pages long, you need a risk management file that shall provide, and they list 4 bullet points. Everybody sees the second half of the sentence and says the risk management file shall provide traceability to each of these 4 things. You got to identify each of your hazards and provide traceability to your risk analysis, your risk evaluation, your verification of risk controls, and your evaluation of residual risk. But in addition to the requirements of all the other clauses in the documents is the part they don't get because they don't read carefully. So read carefully. Don't miss that little part. So all the other clauses apply too. Also, they have to be documented in your risk management file. So every clause 0 or 1 through 10 has to be covered in your risk management file. So you're going to have a risk management procedure. You're going to have a policy on risk, which is above the risk management procedure. Just like we have a quality manual and then we have a quality policy, the risk management policy is up on top. So you have your policy for risk management, deciding when something is an acceptable risk or not, and how you're going to determine that. You got to document that. And if you look at the 24971 guidance, it explains how to do that and gives you a template for it. So create a risk management policy, create a risk management procedure, and then create a risk management plan. The plan is not the policy. The plan is not the procedure. The procedure is not the plan. And the policy is not the plan. Those are 3 different things: a policy, a procedure, and a plan. Your plan is product specific or product family specific. So if you have a family of sutures, all those sutures of the same type could be included. All the different gauges, all the different lengths, but as long as they're the same type of, like, let's say one type of plastic with absorbable sutures, that would be one product family, and you come up with a risk management plan for that family. In the plan, it will say what activities you're going to perform and when you're going to perform them. At the end, when you have a risk management review, the risk management review is what is documented in your report. So you don't have one document that's a risk management report and say, this is my risk management file. No, the report is just a summary of the activities you did. And you create that summary by conducting a risk management review of your plan. So here's my plan. That's one document. At the very end, I'm going to do a review to make sure I did all the things in my plan, and I'm going to summarize that in a report. Any deviations, any conclusions, any things that I need to cover in post-market surveillance, that's what I cover. So that's what your risk management report is. So you have a risk management plan, you have a risk management report. What's in between there? That's what we're going to cover here. And I think it's a little bit helpful to start at the beginning. We actually start with, I'll go all the way to the beginning here. I'll look at the table of contents. So here's the table of contents on this. And I'm not going to go through every single little clause here, but we have scope. That explains the scope of this standard. We have references. We have terms and definitions. This is where the standard really begins on page 7 on clause 4. Your top management is supposed to determine a risk management policy, a risk management procedure, and you're supposed to create a risk management plan for each of your products or product families. That's what it says. It also says you're supposed to do a risk management review. That's in clause 9. But clause 4 is just the basic stuff. You got to have a policy, procedure, and plan. Then we get to step 5, clause 5, that's risk analysis. Before you get into a risk analysis, you're going to have to identify hazards. That's usually step 2. So you have your plan, then you come up with hazard identification. There are actually 3 ways to do that. One is look at previous generations of your device and competitor products. That's going to give you a whole bunch of risks. Like the MAUDE database is a perfect place. Look at your own risk management file that you created before. Even if it was created incorrectly, whatever is in there probably hasn't changed, and you can think of more things. So that's a starting point. Number 2, there is a list of 37 questions. It used to be 34. Now there are 37 questions in Annex A of 24971. So that's ISO 24971. I think it's actually ISO TR for technical report, but it's a guidance document telling you how to apply 14971, and it gives you 37 questions that are supposed to stimulate identification of hazards. And there's a whole nother document I've talked about before about software hazards. So this is just general medical device hazards that you would identify. That's method 2. The third method would be you would actually go through all the different categories of risks that are out there and hazards that are out there, and try to figure out which ones apply to your device. So does your device have chemical hazards? Does your device have biological hazards? Stop playing. I have a cat that wants to play now. So chemical hazards, biological hazards, software hazards, electrical hazards, radiation hazards. It gives you a table, and I believe the table is Annex C 1, I believe it's the table, where it actually, right at the beginning of Annex C, it gives you a little category or a table of here's all the different categories of risks or hazards, and I go through each one and say, does it apply to us or does it not apply to us? And so you should use, it doesn't matter which of the order you go in, but you shouldn't just rely on one of the 3 methods. You should use all 3 methods to help you identify hazards. You are actually required to create a document that says these are the hazards we identified. You document that as an activity, just like you have meeting minutes for design review. This is a risk management activity. You should have meeting minutes for it. And here's what we did, and here's how we did it, and here's who was involved, and here's their training, and here's the documents that were brought to the meeting, and we created a new hazard list. If that isn't something you've done before, if you just had one person go off and type a bunch of answers to the 37 questions, that's not hazard identification. You've done a very poor job of identifying hazards. Yes, you have identified some by answering those 37 questions, but it's a team effort, cross-functional, and it's supposed to be done multiple ways, and it's supposed to be planned because you had a risk management plan, said you would do that, and you document it, and now we have a list of hazards. And you're going to update that over time as you identify new hazards. So the next step after you have identified the hazards, now you're going to have to estimate those hazards. So you're going to say, what is the severity of harm that could happen from this, or the severity of harm from the hazardous situation that's created by the hazard? So that's where you get into the risk analysis. So before you're actually doing risk analysis, you do identify hazards, and then you estimate severity and probability. If you're doing a process risk analysis, which is a type of risk analysis and part of your risk management file, the process risk analysis, you can include detectability because it's possible for automated equipment and inspection to detect defects. But it is not possible to take a reduction in risk for detectability when we're talking about design because it's already too late. It's in the person's hand. They're not an automated piece of equipment that's going to check for defects. They're just going to use it. So you don't take deductions for design for detectability. You only take deductions for detectability in process when you're making the product. So we have typically a design FMEA where we have 2 key things we're looking at, the severity and the probability of occurrence. The probability of occurrence is estimated. There's a lot of ways to estimate it, but if you look in the standard, they have a little simple matrix that's 5 by 5 with probability and severity. You don't have to overthink it. You can make a 10-point scale. It's not right or wrong, but a 5-point scale is what's given as an example. That's what the FDA expects. And if you make a 10-point scale, you're going to spend more time arguing over whether it's a 2 or a 3. If you had a 5-point scale, you wouldn't spend as much time arguing over what the score should be. And it's an estimate. When in doubt, estimate higher risk, estimate higher probability, and then when you gather real post-market data, you can reduce it. And that would be the continuous updating, the living document. So you don't have to worry about being perfect. You can estimate high and adjust it later because it's a living document. They're not etched in stone. But a simple 5-point scale is what I recommend. And particularly for severity, which is the most important, I try to keep it simple. The FDA likes it simple too. You start with death. If it's a 5, it's death. If it's a 4, there's a serious permanent injury, like paralysis, for example. You're not dead, but you're paralyzed very bad. 3, serious injury requires medical attention, or really bad things will happen, like death, like infection, things like that. So those are 3s. 3s, 4s, and 5s are serious injury or death. They're reportable. Really simple. If this happened, or this happened, it's a 3, 4, or 5. I need to report it. Simple. If it's a 2, it's not a serious injury. It doesn't require medical attention. It's a scratch. It's a little scratch. I'll get over it. I don't need medical attention. It's a little abrasion. Yeah, maybe I might put a Band-Aid on it, but I'm not going to the doctor for that. And not just because I'm stubborn. It's just not a severe injury. It's not serious. So it's a 2. 1, it's not an injury at all. If there's no injury whatsoever, it's cosmetic only, there's no harm whatsoever, then it's a 1. That's how you make the score ranks. You can debate it. You can give it whatever definition you want, but really keep it simple. Death, permanent injury, needs medical attention, doesn't need medical attention, no harm at all. Easy. Okay? And come up with something similar on the probability side. My only caveat is I like to use a logarithmic scale. It spreads it out a little bit more, and I can use 10 to the minus 6 for the worst. The best. 10 to the minus 6 would be the smallest, and like 10% chance would be really big. I don't want to see that high. And I try to use logarithmic scales. But do you have to? No, you can come up with any scale you want and document it in your risk management file. So that's risk analysis. Now we have evaluation of risk. Is this an acceptable risk? Well, I need to know what kind of risk controls I'm going to put in. So I evaluate the risks. I say, is this above or below my acceptance criteria in my risk management policy, that other document that nobody ever creates? So is it above or below? And I prioritize them, but I do have to address all of them. The standard says I only have to worry about the ones that aren't acceptable, but Europe doesn't say that. And it's a safer, more conservative approach to address all risks, regardless of acceptability. So do the extra work that Europe mandates instead of the minimum that the standard mandates. Okay? So implement risk controls for all of them, regardless of risk, but prioritize your work on the worst ones, the most severe, the ones that have the highest probability and severity, and don't neglect any of the 3, 4s, and 5s by any means. Now that we have identified which ones are the priorities, now we look at what risk controls we can implement, and we identify risk controls. Well, we might have more than one risk control we can use. Hopefully, we have many risk controls we can use. Now we have a situation where we have risk control option analysis. Do I try method A or method B to reduce my risks? Well, risk control option analysis is something I need to document. It's another activity. So we had a risk analysis where we score things. We have an evaluation where we prioritize and decide what's acceptable and what's not. Then we implement risk controls. We have an option control analysis. We pick the final ones that are best, that give us the best mix with prioritization of things that eliminate by design first. Number 2, provide protective measures like alarms. And 3rd, warn people of any residual risk that we couldn't remove. And then we implement it. So that's when our risk controls get locked in. Now we are at the design freeze because we've implemented the risk controls, our design specifications, and our drawings. So when did the hazard analysis occur? That was probably when you were defining what your design inputs were in your hazards. That's early in your process. Planning went with design planning. Hazards went with design requirements or inputs, and then probably the risk evaluation and risk analysis, risk evaluation, risk controls. Those were all during development. And once you've finalized and implemented, now you are ready for V&V testing. The V&V testing is your evaluation of overall residual risk. It's verifying that the risk controls are complete and adequate. And we say, okay, these are the residual risks. We're going to list them in our instruction for use or user manuals, say what those residual risks are. We say whether they're acceptable or not. We could do a benefit risk analysis. I recommend doing a benefit risk analysis. It's required for Europe. It's required for de novo. It's required for PMAs. It's not required for low risk products in the US that are class 2 that already have a predicate. But, we already know those are acceptable because they're already on the market. They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. The blood pressure cuff, we already know that's on the market. So we know the overall residual risk is acceptable. So that's why you don't have to do the benefit risk analysis for those. But if you're doing it for Europe, you have to do it for everything, no matter what. And now that we've done our benefit risk analysis and we've identified these are the risk controls, we've documented the residual risks in all our labeling, we've done all these different activities. So you had the design FMEA, you evaluated multiple different risk controls, you picked the final ones, you documented them, you did your V&V testing, you did your benefit risk analysis, you've done every activity that was in your plan. Now you have a risk management review at the end saying, yes, we did all our plans, all our planned activities. Here, each one is perfectly documented, and we have a conclusion about it. We identify some post-market things that we want to monitor and how we're going to monitor them. You might even release a post-market surveillance plan for the risk. That's where 10 comes in, production and post-production activities. And you're going to review that plan. Everybody's going to agree on it. And then you're going to document that as your risk management report, and you're done. There is one more type of risk management review, and that is looking at overall, is our risk management policy adequate? Is our risk management procedure adequate? Is our training of the people adequate? So that's just looking at a very high level. Are the risk management activities we're conducting adequate? And then maybe looking like, are we doing the post-production activities that we're supposed to do? Is that being done? Are we consistently completing all the activities that we're supposed to be doing? Now you can say, yes, our risk management process is effective. But the risk management report is a smaller review that you do on each product to make sure that you followed your plan. So you actually have two different risk management reviews you do. The higher one, looking at the effectiveness of the process, is something you do in a management review. The one that's for each individual risk management plan for each product or product family, that would be done more is leading up to your final design review, and you're going to release your product. So the design team typically works on that. Whereas the other one's top management reviewing the overall process. So those are all the activities that you're supposed to be performing. Every single one is going to be documented. Now, whether you put it in a 3-ring binder, in multiple 3-ring binders, or you have it virtually as PDFs in a folder, in SharePoint or something, it doesn't matter. It's still a file. But you should identify what's in the file. So you might have a table of contents, and you might summarize it. You might indicate what the revision is, because you're going to make revisions. And you don't throw out the old revisions. You archive them and put in the new version. So it's a lot like a DMR. And you're going to have revisions over time. So think of it as a DMR, but just for the risk management activities. That's what a risk management file is. And if you have somebody doing a really good job of auditing your risk management process, they should be looking for, do you have a policy? Do you have a procedure? Do you have training? Do you have a plan? And do you have evidence that you did all those activities? I can look at those real quick and yes. Now I'm going to sample some of them in depth and give you more useful feedback. And I know, I've looked at hundreds, probably thousands of risk management documents over my life. And so I know what things people are weak at and things people are strong at. So I know where to bias my sampling for the things you're weaker at. But if you're going to do a gap analysis of your risk management file, just go down your table of contents here. In number 4, it's going to be policy, procedure, plan. And then it's, did you do a hazard identification, risk analysis, risk evaluation, risk controls, risk control option analysis? Did you finalize and implement your risk controls? Evaluation of overall residual risk, documented the risks in your IFU and in your manual. Do a benefit risk analysis, come up with a post-market surveillance plan, and then finally document in a risk management report. And are you updating it over time, or is it untouched for 5 years? So that's how to build a risk management file. I hope that was helpful to you people out there that have never done this before and have no idea what goes in a risk management file. But that's 30-minute sort of, this is how to do it. I hope that was helpful to you. And if you have suggestions for other videos, please put it in the comments below. I read the comments and give you feedback on them. And it's a great source of ideas for future topics. So hope to see your comments there. Thank you. Bye-bye. And happy 4th of July.